So that was a report from DC, and now we're going to move back over to New York City with another Heidi, Heidi Reavis, who is the chair of the century-old organization Women's City Club of New York, which had a contingent on the, I believe it was on the Upper West Side earlier today. If you don't know much about Women's City Club, we'll ask Heidi about it. One of its earliest members, one of its earliest founding members was Eleanor Roosevelt. You might not know that. Heidi Reavis, Reavis, welcome to WBAI.
Thank you so much, Jeff and Celeste. We really appreciate your having me today. And it was a cold day outside, but we all were very cozy and warmed up for a wonderful day of celebrating diversity and togetherness and progress.
You know, despite the weather forecast, I don't know what it is right now outside, but I have to say it was cold, but it wasn't snowy. So far we're not getting the bad weather that had been expected until maybe later. And anyway, so tell us a little about what it was like, what the theme, the mood was out on the streets. I mean, we're hearing that it was a thinner crowd, but some of the people we've spoken with who did participate told us what motivated them. So I'm also curious what motivated you to participate today.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, I found the event very, very uplifting. Of course, hardly a march I've missed. But today was a special one. It felt like a real coming together of friends and families, men and women, and especially in this political environment, having an opportunity to gather again, and the weather gods shining down upon us. I think for many of us, making the time to attend the Women's March and also making the time to show a symbol of inclusiveness and togetherness is more and more a priority, not to take what we have for granted, and to really express that we have to show it and take our time and maybe go out of our way to make sure that the message of inclusion is something that is seen and heard far and wide, not just in terms of personal daily decisions, but coming together at events like today.
And with some of our guests today, we have, we've talked about the controversy, but we've also talked about how inspiring it has been to see a continued, an ongoing level of civic engagement. Your thoughts on that?
Thanks for asking about that. First of all, at the Women's City Club of New York, which is one of the older organizations that's been very much focused on grassroots activism and trying to participate in making the city a better place for everyone, and also focusing on those less represented and underserved. I have to say, I feel that this year is a banner year for New York State, that we, once again, I'd like to believe, are taking the lead in legislation that really shows we're not just leaning in and listening, but acting and responding. Everything from increasing the minimum wage to $15 just a few weeks ago, passing legislation just a few months ago, focused on anti-harassment initiatives and discrimination training at all employers, to additional legislation supporting the claims of victims of sexual harassment. We're not just marching today in the hope of things happening in the future, but I think our group marched today and also to support those legislators that actually have made it a priority to act swiftly and make up for lost time.
So in your full-time career, you're managing partner of Reavis Page Jump LLP, and this law firm specializes in alternate dispute resolution and litigation. My assumption is there are a number of cases that are relevant to women in your practice. Can you talk a little about how in your career you've been dealing with a lot of the issues that also motivated people to go out on the streets today?
Thanks, Jeff. To give credit where it's due, the firm also does work in various commercial areas that are not necessarily ones you read about in the paper, but on a daily basis, we deal with, I'd say, what we call issues of best practices and trying to assist companies and organizations to implement patterns and policies where treatment is respectful and inclusive and opportunity is given in the halls that are not necessarily in the public eye. So our work in the employment field focuses on working with organizations and individuals to have more of an inclusive and progressive environment. Specifically, recently we've unveiled live trainings that are responsive to the legislation that passed in just this past October that have to do with anti-harassment training and discrimination prevention at the workplace. Because as of October 9, New York State is again in the forefront, one of a number of states that have legislated having workplaces where people understand not just what some of the problem trends are, but also what their rights are, what the agencies there are that are there to assist and make sure that the information is out, and that private employers have an obligation not just to adopt whatever policies they may wish for themselves, but to make sure that their employees take ownership of upholding the law and treating one another respectfully and inclusively. So it's a very important year, once again, for New York State and a handful of other states that really are, voting with their principle and doing so very quickly.
And I'm just curious to know if you think that the Women's March, particularly as a movement, is sort of, does it really have a central meaning? Is it just sort of people showing up to march for whatever they believe in? Because we were talking about some of the controversies, and one of our earlier guests said the answer is, look, you're not going to necessarily agree with everything that is put out there by the organizers, but you're sort of marching for what you believe in. Is that really a movement, or is that people showing up wearing hats, walking down the same street together?
You know, Celeste, that's an insightful question, and I think today's march was less reactive and more a coming together of people feeling like we are, in fact, part of one community. And the recent events leading up to today's march, or marches, I think for many of us crystallized that those divisions really get in the way of long-term progress, and that we actually, like it or not, are part of one community, and that historic issues and differences, while there, shouldn't get in the way of progress and shouldn't be obstacles to our figuring out how to work together to really speed up what has to happen.
So I had read a profile of you in which you also talked about being, if I'm correct, a second-generation member of the Women's City Club. Talk to me a little about how your mother inspired you to get involved in organizations and to be civically engaged.
Thank you, Jeff. She would appreciate hearing that. Well, my mother was a first-generation woman of Greek background, who was the first person to go to college in the family and had a career in foreign affairs, and became interested in the Women's City Club as an avenue for more local advocacy, and sought me out as I was building my own law practice. And at first I told her to, what can I say, that I didn't have time to focus on civic engagement because I was focusing on my own practice. Over time, I realized that that was short-sighted, and that all of us, if we can take a little time to understand more outside of our own networks, outside of the echo chamber, that is what is needed to really push progress forward. So she inspired me, and I do what I can to inspire others as much or as little as I can, but I am a firm believer that some of the tremendous rifts that we're experiencing internally within the progressive movement or externally with our nation, really, if we can find it within us to begin to identify with others that on the surface we don't have much in common with, that has to happen for us to get over what seems to be a mountain in front of us.
Heidi Reavis, Board Chair of Women's City Club of New York, thank you for joining us. And for our listeners, by the way, I want to make sure you know the website is wccny.org. Heidi Reavis, thank you for joining Celeste.
Thanks, Jeff and Celeste. Okay, have a good one.
Thanks.
Dry.
You
Ciao.
too.
Bye-bye.